everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The worst Thanksgiving of my life. I'll never forget the moment I walked into Michael's family home for the first time and felt like I had walked into a room full of strangers who had already decided they didn't like me. It was Thanksgiving, and I had spent 3 hours preparing, picking the perfect dress, practicing my small talk, rehearsing the questions I thought they might ask. I wanted them to like me so badly that my hands were shaking when I rang the doorbell. His mother opened the door, smiled politely, and said, "Oh, you must be the girlfriend. Not welcome. Not we're so glad to meet you." Just that, the girlfriend. As if I were a placeholder, a temporary position, someone who might not be around for long. My stomach dropped. I walked inside, and the entire family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all of them staring at me like I was a rare animal in a zoo. I smiled and said hello in the most perfect American English I could manage, and they just nodded. No one asked me questions. No one made eye contact for more than a second. No one made me feel welcome. I sat down at the dinner table, surrounded by people who were all related to each other, all laughing at inside jokes I couldn't follow, all speaking in a rhythm I couldn't keep up with. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of faces that didn't want me there. And then it got worse. Michael's grandmother, a tiny woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, looked at me across the table and said, "So, how long have you been in this country? You sound like you're from somewhere." I felt my face burn. I had been in America for years by then, and I had worked so hard to erase my accent. But she had heard it, that small, lingering trace of the place I came from. And she had called it out in front of everyone. I mumbled something about my background, and she just nodded and turned away, like I had confirmed something she already knew. I spent the rest of that dinner in silence, pushing food around my plate, fighting back tears. Every time I tried to speak, I felt like I was intruding. Every joke I attempted fell flat. Every conversation I tried to join ended with awkward silence. I was convinced that Michael's entire family hated me. I couldn't understand why he had brought me here. I couldn't understand why they couldn't just accept me. I wanted to run out the door and never come back. But then, later that night, when I was gathering my coat to leave, Michael's uncle walked up to me and said something that made my heart stop. He said, "We're glad you came." She hasn't smiled like that in years. And I realized, in that moment, that maybe, just maybe, I had misread everything. But I wasn't ready to trust that yet. Not until I learned the truth about the family I had been so afraid of. The look that said everything. You know what's worse than someone openly hating you? Someone who's too polite to tell you they hate you. Because then you spend every moment analyzing their silence, their glances, their tiny micro-expressions, trying to decode what they're really thinking. That was my entire relationship with Michael's family for the first year. I became an expert in reading their faces, and I was convinced every single one of them wished I would just disappear. There was his sister, Emma, who barely looked at me when I walked into the room. She would smile, but the smile never reached her eyes. I told myself she was just being polite, tolerating me because she had no choice. There was his father, David, who shook my hand too quickly and always found an excuse to leave the room after 5 minutes of conversation. I was certain he had a list of reasons why his son shouldn't be dating a foreigner. And then there was his mother, Margaret, the most terrifying of them all. She would ask me questions, but not like she was actually interested. More like she was gathering evidence. Where did you say you grew up? What do your parents do? Do you have any family here? Every question felt like an interrogation. Every answer felt like a test I was failing. I would go home after every family dinner and cry in the bathroom. I would tell Michael that his family hated me, and he would say, "No, they don't. You're just imagining it." But I was sure I wasn't imagining it. I could see it in the way they looked at me. I could hear it in the way they lowered their voices when I walked into the room. I was so convinced that I was unwanted that I started dreading every single family gathering. My stomach would twist into knots days before. I would rehearse conversations in my head, trying to find the perfect thing to say that would finally make them accept me. But nothing ever worked. The worst moment was Christmas. Michael's family had a tradition of opening gifts one by one, everyone watching as each person unwrapped their present. And I watched as everyone received beautiful, thoughtful gifts, handmade scarves, leather journals, vintage jewelry. And then it was my turn. They handed me a box, small and rectangular. My heart was pounding. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment they accepted me. I opened it carefully, and inside was a set of coasters. Generic, mass-produced, completely impersonal coasters. I smiled and thanked them, but inside, something broke. Coasters. They had given me coasters. Not a family heirloom. Not a personal gift. Just coasters. I was convinced that this was proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof, that I would never belong. I couldn't stop thinking about those coasters for weeks. Every time I saw them sitting on Michael's coffee table, I felt that familiar sting of rejection. But I had no idea that those coasters would end up being the key to unlocking everything I had misread about his family. Because a few months later, Michael's sister told me the truth about those coasters, and about everything else I had been so certain about. And I was completely, utterly wrong. The language barrier that broke me. Let me tell you about the most humiliating moment of my entire relationship with Michael's family, and it had nothing to do with coasters or Thanksgiving or awkward silences. It had everything to do with language. We were sitting in his parents' living room, and his sister Emma told a story about something that happened at her work. Everyone started laughing, genuine, belly laughing, tears in their eyes laughing. And I sat there, completely frozen, because I had no idea what was funny. I understood every single word. I knew the vocabulary. I knew the grammar. But I didn't get the joke. There was some cultural reference, some inside knowledge, some unspoken assumption that everyone in that room shared, and I didn't. And when Michael turned to me and asked, "Did you get that?" his face fell when he saw my expression. I shook my head, and the room went quiet. The laughter stopped. Everyone was looking at me again. I felt that familiar heat crawl up my neck. I felt like I had failed some invisible test. And then Emma said, "Oh, it's just a joke about our family. Don't worry about it." But I did worry about it. I worried about it for weeks. Because I realized, in that moment, that English wasn't just a language. It was a whole universe of cultural references, shared experiences, and unspoken assumptions. I had learned the words, but I hadn't learned the world. I started keeping track of all the moments I didn't understand, the movie quotes they referenced, the childhood memories they laughed about. The inside jokes that flew over my head like invisible birds. I felt like I was standing outside a glass window, watching a family have a conversation I could never join. Every single conversation made me feel more isolated. I would sit there, smiling and nodding, pretending I understood, while inside I was screaming. I was so afraid of looking stupid that I stopped contributing entirely. I would spend entire dinners saying nothing, just pushing food around my plate, waiting for the torture to end. Michael would try to include me, tell them about your job, tell them about that trip you took, but every time I opened my mouth, I felt like I was performing. And even when I did speak, I was so focused on pronouncing every word perfectly that I forgot to be myself. I forgot to be funny. I forgot to be warm. I forgot to be the person Michael fell in love with. I became a shell of myself, a robot who said the right things but never said anything real. It wasn't until months later, when Emma cornered me in the kitchen, that I finally understood the truth. She said, "We're not laughing at you. We're just trying to include you. We just don't know how." And I realized that I wasn't the only one who felt awkward. They were just as scared of messing up as I was. But I still had so much more to learn about this family. And the biggest surprise was still to come. The Thanksgiving that changed everything. I ruined Thanksgiving by accidentally insulting the potatoes. That's not a joke. That's what I thought happened. We were all sitting around the dinner table. And Michael's mother had made her famous mashed potatoes, the one dish everyone in the family talked about all year. It was a recipe passed down from her grandmother, a family treasure that no one dared to alter. And when she placed the bowl in front of me, I smiled and said, "These look delicious. We have something similar in my country, but we use more herbs." The room went silent. I mean, dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. I looked around, confused. Michael was staring at his plate. His sister Emma was looking at her mother with wide eyes. His father cleared his throat and took a very long sip of wine. And his mother, Margaret, she just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. I had no idea what I had done wrong. I thought I was paying a compliment. I thought I was sharing something about my culture, something that might connect us. But instead, I had committed a sin I didn't even know existed. I had suggested, even slightly, that someone else's recipe could be improved. In this family, that was heresy. I spent the rest of that dinner in agony, replaying the moment in my head, convinced that I had just destroyed any chance of being accepted. I barely touched my food. I couldn't look anyone in the eye. And when the meal was over, I excused myself and went to the bathroom, locked the door, and let the tears come. I was so sure that I had ruined everything. That they would never forgive me. That Michael would finally realize his family was right and leave me for someone who understood American culture. But then there was a knock on the bathroom door. A soft knock. And a voice I didn't expect. It was Margaret. She said, "Can I come in?" I opened the door, expecting anger, disappointment, rejection. But instead, she was holding a bowl of mashed potatoes and a fork. She said, "Here. You barely ate. And I want you to tell me about those herbs you mentioned." I blinked at her, completely confused. "I thought you were mad at me," I said. She laughed, a warm, genuine laugh that I had never heard from her before. "Mad at you," she said. "Sweetheart, I've been making those potatoes for 40 years. I'm always looking for ways to improve them. I just didn't know how to ask." And that was the moment I realized that this family wasn't rejecting me. They were just as scared of messing up as I was. They didn't know how to include me. They didn't know how to ask. But they wanted to. They just needed someone to show them how. And that night, sitting on the bathroom floor with a bowl of mashed potatoes and a woman I thought hated me, I began to understand that everything I had been so certain about was completely wrong. The whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. I want to tell you about the moment I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear, and how it shattered everything I thought I knew about Michael's family. It was a few weeks after the Thanksgiving potato incident, and I was starting to feel slightly more comfortable around them. Not comfortable, exactly. But less like I was walking on eggshells. Margaret had started asking me about my culture, about the food I grew up eating, about the holidays we celebrated. She seemed genuinely curious, and I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, I had misjudged her. But then I overheard something that sent me spiraling back into doubt. I was in the kitchen, helping Emma wash dishes after Sunday dinner, when I heard Margaret and Michael's father talking in the other room. They were speaking quietly, too quietly, and I caught my name. "She seems nice enough," I heard David say. "But Michael's moving so fast. Are we sure this is a good idea?" My heart stopped. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Emma, who was suddenly very focused on scrubbing a pan that was already clean. She had heard it too. I couldn't breathe. I set down the plate I was drying and walked out of the kitchen without saying a word. I found Michael in the living room and whispered, "I need to leave. Now." He looked confused but could see the panic in my eyes. We said our goodbyes quickly, and I didn't look at anyone. I didn't want to see the judgment in their eyes. I didn't want to confirm what I had already convinced myself was true, that they didn't want me, that I was a threat to their family. That Michael's father had doubts about our relationship. The car ride home was silent. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even cry. I was just frozen, replaying those words over and over in my head. Are we sure this is a good idea? I was so certain that his father had been expressing doubts about me, about my background, my culture, my place in their family. I spent the next week avoiding Michael's parents. I made excuses not to come to Sunday dinner. I told Michael I was busy with work, even though I wasn't. I was just too ashamed to face them. I was so sure that his father regretted having me in their lives. But then Emma called me. She said, "I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen without interrupting." And what she told me made me drop the phone. It turned out that his father's concern wasn't about me at all. He was worried about Michael, his job, his financial stability, his readiness for a serious commitment. He wanted to make sure his son was mature enough to marry someone like me. Someone special. Someone who deserved a man who had his life together. I had misheard everything. I had turned his father's concern for his son's readiness into a rejection of me. And I realized, in that moment, that I had been doing this for the entire year, interpreting every look, every comment, every whisper as evidence that I didn't belong. But the truth was so much simpler and so much kinder. They weren't rejecting me. They were just worried about their son. And that worry, I finally understood, was a sign that they cared about him and about me. The mother-in-law who never smiled. Let me tell you about Margaret, the woman I was convinced would never accept me as part of her family. For an entire year, I watched her like a hawk, cataloging every moment she didn't smile at me, every time she looked away when I spoke. Every conversation she ended just a little too quickly. I was absolutely certain she hated me. And the worst part? I couldn't figure out why. I tried everything. I brought her flowers. I helped with the dishes. I complimented her cooking. I learned her favorite recipes and made them for her. Nothing worked. She remained polite but distant, warm with everyone else but cold with me. Michael kept telling me I was imagining it, but I knew I wasn't. I could feel it in the way she stiffened when I walked into the room. I could see it in the way she never quite looked me in the eye. I was so convinced of her rejection that I started dreading every interaction with her. My heart would race when I saw her name on my phone. My stomach would twist into knots before every family dinner. I felt like I was constantly being judged, constantly being found wanting, constantly being rejected by the one person whose approval I wanted most. But then something happened that changed everything. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and Margaret and I were alone in the kitchen. Michael had taken his father to a baseball game, and Emma was at work. I was helping Margaret prepare dinner, and we were working in silence, uncomfortable silence, at least for me. And then she said something that made me drop the knife I was holding. She said, "I know you think I don't like you. And I'm sorry." I stared at her, completely stunned. "What do you mean?" I asked. She sighed and set down the vegetable she was chopping. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I've never been good at showing emotion. I've never been good at making people feel welcome. I grew up in a family where we didn't talk about feelings. We just did things. We showed love through action, not words." I blinked at her, processing what she was saying. "So you don't hate me?" She laughed, a soft, sad laugh. "Hate you? Sweetheart, I don't hate you. I just don't know how to show you that I love you. I've never had a daughter-in-law before. I don't know how to do this." And then she reached out and took my hand, the first time she had ever touched me voluntarily. "I'm not cold," she said. "I'm just scared. I'm scared of making you uncomfortable. I'm scared of saying the wrong thing. I'm scared of pushing you away." I started crying, ugly crying, the kind that makes your nose run and your voice crack. All that time I had spent thinking she hated me, and she had been just as scared as I was. She had been scared of messing up. Scared of me. And I had been so focused on my own insecurities that I had completely missed hers. That was the moment I realized that the distance between us wasn't rejection. It was fear. And when fear is the only thing standing between two people, it can be overcome. But Margaret still had one more secret, one more truth that would make me understand everything I had misread about this family. And it would come from the most unexpected source. The secret Emma told me. The truth about Margaret, the real truth, the one that made me understand everything, came from Emma. Sitting in her car outside my apartment on a rainy Tuesday evening. She had called me earlier that day and asked if we could talk. Just the two of us. No Michael. No parents. Just us. I was nervous, of course. I thought maybe she was going to tell me that her mother really did hate me, that I should stop trying, that I would never be part of their family. But instead, she told me a story that made me weep. She told me about Margaret's sister, a woman named Diane who had died 20 years ago. Diane had been Margaret's best friend, her confidant, the person she was closest to in the entire world. And Diane had been engaged to a man from another country. A man her family didn't approve of. They had pressured her to break it off. They had told her she was making a mistake, that she should marry someone from their culture, someone they understood. And Diane had listened. She had ended the relationship, married someone her family approved of, and spent the rest of her life quietly miserable. She died young, in a car accident, before she ever got the chance to be truly happy. Margaret had never forgiven herself. She had been the one who pressured Diane the most. She had been the one who said, "You'll thank us one day." But that day never came. And when Michael started dating me, a woman from a different country, a different culture, a different world, Margaret's old fears came rushing back. She wasn't rejecting me. She was terrified of history repeating itself. She was terrified that if she pushed too hard, if she made me feel unwelcome, she would lose her son the way she had lost her sister. She was so scared of making the same mistake that she had done the exact opposite. She had been so careful not to pressure me that she came across as cold and distant. I sat in Emma's car, tears streaming down my face, and I felt something shift inside me. All that time I had spent feeling rejected, and Margaret had been carrying guilt and grief that I couldn't even imagine. She hadn't been rejecting me. She had been protecting me. Protecting herself. Protecting her son from the same pain that had haunted her for 2 decades. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. "She doesn't know how to tell you," she said. "She's never been able to talk about Diane. It's too painful. But she told me to tell you. She wanted you to understand." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to process all of this. I had spent a year convinced that Margaret hated me, and the truth was so much more complicated and so much more heartbreaking. She had been carrying this weight for 20 years, and I had been too focused on my own insecurities to see it. But now I knew. And knowing changed everything. I had to talk to Margaret. I had to tell her that I understood. But I had no idea what I was going to say, or how she would react when she found out I knew her deepest secret. The next Sunday, I walked into her kitchen with my heart pounding, ready to face the truth. And what happened next was something I never could have predicted. The moment I finally understood. The next Sunday, I walked into Margaret's kitchen with my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. I had been rehearsing what to say for days. I had practiced it in the shower, in the car, in front of the mirror late at night when I couldn't sleep. But when I finally stood in front of her, all those carefully prepared words evaporated from my brain. I just stood there, frozen, like an idiot. She looked up from the vegetables she was chopping and raised an eyebrow. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I laughed, a nervous, shaky laugh. Something like that. And then I just said it. Emma told me about Diane. The knife in Margaret's hand stopped moving. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band about to snap. For a moment, I thought she was going to be angry. I thought she would tell me it was none of my business, that I had overstepped, that I should leave. But instead, she set down the knife very carefully and sat down at the kitchen table. She looked so small all of a sudden. So tired. So old. "She told you everything?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Margaret was quiet for a long time. And then she said, "I was so afraid. When Michael told me he was dating someone from another country, I was so afraid." Her voice cracked. I thought I was going to lose him. I thought I would push him away the way I pushed Diane away. I thought I would make the same mistake twice. And I couldn't bear it. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, the first time I had ever seen her cry. So I did the opposite. I was so careful not to push you away that I pushed you away anyway. I was so scared of making you feel unwelcome that I made you feel unwelcome. I reached across the table and took her hand. "I thought you hated me," I said. "For a whole year, I thought you hated me." She squeezed my hand so tightly it almost hurt. "I could never hate you," she said. "I just didn't know how to love you. I didn't know how to let another foreigner into my heart after what happened to Diane. I was too scared. But I'm not scared anymore." And then she said something that made my entire body go still. "I know my son. And I know he loves you. And if he loves you, then I love you too." I just needed to be brave enough to say it. I started crying, of course I did, because crying is apparently my permanent emotional state now, and I hugged her. For the first time in a year, I hugged Margaret. And she hugged me back. We stayed like that for a long time, two women who had been scared of each other for all the wrong reasons. Two women who had finally, after all this time, found their way to each other. I realized, in that moment, that all the signs I had been reading as rejection were actually signs of something else entirely. Fear. Grief. Love that didn't know how to express itself. I had been so convinced that I didn't belong that I had refused to see the truth. And the truth was that Margaret had already accepted me. She had accepted me the moment Michael told her he loved me. She had just been too scared to show it. And now, holding her in her kitchen, I finally understood. But I still had one more lesson to learn, one more truth that would change everything I knew about family, belonging, and the meaning of being truly accepted. A new family, a new love. Here's the thing about families, they don't become your family overnight. It happens in small moments. Tiny, almost invisible moments that you don't even notice until you look back and realize you've been part of something all along. After my conversation with Margaret, everything started to change. But it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like a switch flipped and suddenly we were best friends. It was gradual. It was subtle. It was the kind of change that sneaks up on you. The first sign was a phone call. Margaret called me, not Michael, not Emma, but me, and asked if I wanted to come over and help her with a recipe she had been struggling with. She said, "I thought maybe you could show me that dish you mentioned. The one from your country." I almost dropped the phone. She wanted to learn my recipe, my culture, my food. She wanted to connect with me through something that was mine. I drove over that afternoon, and we spent 3 hours in her kitchen, cooking together, laughing, making mistakes, and learning about each other. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a visitor. I felt like family. Then came the Sunday dinners. Margaret started asking me questions about my childhood, my parents, the holidays we celebrated. She wanted to know about my traditions, my history, the things that had made me who I am. And when I told her, she listened. Actually listened. She remembered the details, asked follow-up questions, and brought up things I had mentioned weeks earlier. It wasn't just politeness anymore. It was genuine interest. It was love. And then there were the little things, the way David started saving me a seat at the table. The way Emma started texting me memes she thought I would find funny. The way Margaret started calling me sweetheart instead of just my name. It was the accumulation of these small moments that made me realize what had been true all along. They had accepted me. They had accepted me from the very beginning. I was just too scared to see it. I had been so focused on reading rejection into every gesture that I had missed the countless moments of warmth and welcome that surrounded me. I had been so convinced I didn't belong that I had refused to see the truth. And the truth was that this family had been waiting for me. Not tolerating me, not putting up with me, but genuinely, authentically, wholeheartedly waiting for me. They had been waiting for me to let my guard down, to stop being afraid, to finally let myself be loved. It took me a year to realize that I had been the only barrier to belonging. They had opened their arms, and I had been too scared to walk into them. But now I knew better. Now I understood. And I was ready to embrace this new family, this new love, this new life. But before I could fully let go of my old fears, I had to face one more thing. One more truth that would seal everything I had learned. And it came from the most unexpected source, Michael's father, David, who had been the quietest, most distant member of the family. I had no idea what he was about to say to me, and I was terrified to find out. But I also knew that I was finally ready to listen. I was wrong about everything. David found me in the garden, staring at a rose bush like it held the secrets to the universe. It was the day after Margaret and I had our breakthrough, and I was still processing everything. I thought I had figured out this family. I thought I understood their fears, their love, their complicated history. But David was about to teach me the final lesson I needed to learn. He sat down on the bench next to me, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. I had always thought David was the quietest member of the family, the one who kept his distance, who never seemed to have an opinion about anything. I had assumed he was just going along with whatever his wife wanted. But I was wrong about that too. He looked at me and said, "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone." I felt my breath catch. "What is it?" He was quiet for another long moment, and then he said, "When Michael first told us about you, I was terrified. Not because of where you were from. Not because of your culture. But because I had seen what love across cultures could cost." He was talking about Diane. He had known her too, Margaret's sister. He had watched her break her own heart to please her family. And he had watched her never recover. He said, "I didn't want that for Michael. I didn't want him to have to choose between the woman he loved and his family. I was scared that you wouldn't understand us. That we wouldn't understand you. That the differences would be too big to overcome." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were wet. But I was wrong. You understood us better than we understood ourselves. You were patient. You were kind. You never gave up on us, even when we gave you every reason to. I felt tears streaming down my face. "I didn't understand anything," I said. "I thought you all hated me." David laughed, a warm, gentle laugh. "Hate you? Sweetheart, we started loving you the moment Michael brought you home. We just didn't know how to show it. We're not good at that in this family. But we're learning." He reached over and took my hand. "You belong here," he said. "Not because you changed yourself to fit in. But because you stayed. You kept showing up. You kept loving my son. And you made this family better just by being here." I leaned into him, and he put his arm around me like I was his own daughter. And in that moment, I finally understood what I had been missing all along. Families don't just accept you, they embrace you. They challenge you. They frustrate you. And sometimes they scare you. But if you let them, they become your home. I spent a year believing that Michael's family hated me. I had misread every look, every silence, every awkward conversation. I had been so focused on what I thought I saw that I missed what was really there, love. Imperfect, clumsy, scared love. The kind of love that doesn't always know how to show itself, but never stops trying. And I had finally, after all this time, let myself be loved. I hugged David tightly and whispered, "Thank you." He patted my back and said, Welcome to the family. And I realized, standing there in that garden, that I hadn't just found Michael. I had found a whole new family. And they had been waiting for me all along. That's all for today. I'll make more similar videos in the future. Don't forget to subscribe to see them.